fluorescent lights of St. Michael's Hospital flickered with an almost mocking rhythm, casting the linoleum floors in a harsh, sterile glare. In the emergency wing, chaos unfolded with the cold efficiency of a ticking clock. Nurses hurried, doctors barked orders, and the scent of antiseptic clung to every surface like a ghost. Yet amid the controlled storm, one figure moved differently, almost invisible. He wore a janitor's uniform, the dull blue of a worker blending seamlessly with the sterile walls, pushing a mop across a floor already sticky with the day's relentless tide of human frailty. No one noticed him. Few looked him in the eye. Some even whispered, their tone tinged with impatience or condescension. "Move aside," said a doctor without seeing him, as if the man were part of the walls themselves. But beneath the quiet gait and the janitor's cap that shadowed his face, a lifetime of discipline and silent heroism lingered like a coiled spring. Suddenly, the tension that had been simmering in the ER erupted. A young soldier, barely 23, pale and trembling, collapsed near the intake desk. His uniform was folded over him like a discarded flag, eyes rolled back. His chest no longer rose. Panic ignited around him, nurses shouted. A resident stumbled over the stretcher, and the orderly froze, unsure of protocol. But the janitor moved first. He dropped the mop with a soft clatter and knelt beside the soldier, his hand steady, almost surgical. Time seemed to bend around him, stretching each heartbeat into an eternity. The world fell away. The cries, the chaos, the hospital itself, all of it receded until there was only the soldier's faltering pulse and the quiet, implacable authority in the janitor's hands. "Call a code," someone yelled, panic sharpening the syllables. He ignored the command. Not because he defied it, but because he already knew what had to be done. He had been here before, in places far removed from fluorescent lights and linoleum floors. War zones where time was measured in the fragility of life and the silence between heartbeats. His fingers pressed against the soldier's chest with precision honed over decades of impossible decisions. A nurse froze, eyes wide. "He's a janitor," she stammered. He didn't look up. He had no need to explain. Experience, like gravity, demanded recognition on its own terms. Within moments, which felt like an eternity, the soldier gasped, a flicker of life that spread through the room like dawn breaking after a storm. Relief cascaded around him, but the room still buzzed with disbelief. Whispers rippled through the ER. Janitor saved him. Before anyone could speak, before applause could bloom, the man stood, silent and unassuming, collected his mop, and returned to his unnoticed work. No one asked his name. Few remembered it. And yet, the image of calm authority in the eye of mortal panic lingered like a quiet promise. Not all heroes wore uniforms that commanded attention. Before we dive deeper into the story, I need to pause and ask you, where are you watching this story today? Take a moment, comment below, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to support more stories that honor silent heroes. He was Marcus Hayes. To the hospital staff, he was the janitor, the man who moved quietly, mopped floors without complaint, and smiled faintly when children pointed at him with curiosity. He carried no badges, no medals, no certificates framed on the wall, but inside him was a labyrinth of stories stitched together by sacrifice, discipline, and grief too deep for casual observation. His hands, calloused from mops and scrubbing chemicals, had once steadied a scalpel in the belly of a battlefield operating theater. His eyes, calm and brown, had seen the fragility of life in its most raw, unpolished form. Marcus's mornings began before the sun, not with routine, but with ritual. A silent jog through empty streets, the rhythm of his steps tracing the cadence of battles long past. He had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat surgeon, a man who stitched together torn bodies while bombs rained around him, saving soldiers who would later call him Angel, without ever truly understanding the cost. He had held the hands of dying men, whispered courage into ears clouded by fear and morphine, and learned that silence, more than orders, often saved lives. War had taken everything. His best friend Tom's had died under his hands, eyes wide with trust and betrayal all at once. Marcus had returned home carrying that memory like a phantom limb, invisible but unyielding. The hospital became his sanctuary and his penance. He worked the night shift, mopping floors that no one noticed, emptying trash bins without complaint, and keeping the quiet company of machines that beeped with unfeeling regularity. No one knew of the hands that once operated with the precision of life and death on a battlefield. No one asked. And yet, The universe had a cruel way of demanding that hidden truth surface at the most impossible moments. St. Michael's was a hospital that functioned like a clock, precise, orderly, regulated. Rules mattered more than instinct. Protocol mattered more than intuition. Authority dominated over humanity, and Marcus, with his quiet competence, existed just beneath the threshold of visibility. He scrubbed floors that bore the stains of human suffering, invisible and unremarked. The staff saw him, yes, but only as a figure in the periphery, a nameless shadow performing duties of low status. They underestimated him. They doubted his capabilities. They whispered when he passed, dismissing him as background noise, unaware that the man they ignored had once commanded field hospitals, saved lives under fire, and held the fragile thread between existence and oblivion in his hands. When the soldier collapsed, it was more than a medical emergency. It was a moral test for the hospital. Authority hesitated. Protocol faltered. Yet Marcus moved as though the world had slowed for him alone. The contrast was stark, a system paralyzed by hierarchy, a man invisible yet instantly decisive. "Who is he?" Someone murmured, awe and confusion intermingling. "Just the janitor," another said, shaking her head as though the truth was too uncomfortable to believe. Marcus didn't argue. He never did. He let his actions speak in a language the world refused to hear until it had no choice but to listen. The soldier's body lay limp on the floor, his uniform damp with sweat and fear, his chest refusing to rise with life's usual rhythm. The hospital staff clustered around him, a chaotic constellation of fear and indecision. Nurses whispered, residents barked procedural instructions that collided and overlapped, and no one seemed to know exactly what to do first. Marcus knelt beside the soldier, his hands moving with absolute precision, pressing against ribs that no one else dared touch. His calm contrasted the storm of panic. Around him, the room seemed to shiver with tension, fluorescent lights flickering above like impatient witnesses. He had been here before, not in this hospital, not in this sterile civilian world, but somewhere much harsher. He remembered the dust-choked desert of Helmand Province, where the air itself tasted of gunpowder and sweat, where the shrieks of the wounded were swallowed by the silence of the unburied, where decisions had to be made in fractions of seconds, because hesitation meant death. The soldier's pulse fluttered, shallow, almost imperceptible. Marcus's eyes narrowed, reading the subtle signs invisible to those around him, the pale tint of lips, the faint convulsions of the fingers, the shallow tremor in the shoulders. He adjusted his hands, pressing more firmly, and a bead of sweat traced down his temple. Someone coughed nervously. We need the crash cart," a nurse stammered. Her voice was shaky, the weight of responsibility pressing her chest like a lead block. Marcus shook his head imperceptibly, signaling without speaking that the moment for external help had passed. In war, he had learned, machines and rules could not save the living. Only hands, knowledge, and calm courage could. The room was silent now, not because the chaos had ended, but because no one dared breathe too loudly. The staff watched, frozen, as the janitor, an invisible figure they had ignored moments before, held life in his hands. Their disbelief gnawed at the edges of their minds. You're a janitor," muttered a young resident, eyes wide. "You how?" Marcus didn't answer. He had learned long ago that words were fragile, often meaningless, especially in moments when life itself trembled on a thread. Actions carried weight. Actions could save a life. Actions could teach respect. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Time had no meaning here. Marcus's focus never wavered. His breathing was steady, his posture firm, his hands unwavering. Every muscle, every nerve, seemed attuned to the fragile life beneath him. And then it came, a subtle flicker of resistance. The soldier coughed, a wet, rattling sound that filled the room with relief and disbelief. Marcus's hands did not relax, he simply adjusted, pressing with renewed confidence. The pulse returned, faint but steady. Color seeped back into the soldier's face like ink into water. The room exhaled collectively, a mixture of awe and shame. They had dismissed him, underestimated him, ignored him, and yet here he was, proving not just skill but an unshakable dignity. As Marcus continued to stabilize the soldier, his eyes flicked briefly to the corner of the room, where a small, nondescript bag leaned against a metal cart. Inside it were tools no janitor should have: a stethoscope, a trauma kit, a neatly folded field surgical kit, all remnants of his past life. It was a whisper of the world he carried with him silently, unseen, like a shadow following him through hospital halls. The bystanders noticed nothing, but the story was quietly shifting. Those who had ignored him were now watching. Forced to confront the uncomfortable truth, the world's measure of worth often misses the invisible, quiet power of lived experience. Marcus's calm created tension in the hearts of those around him. How could someone so lowly, so underestimated, wield such authority? The hospital hierarchy, rigid and unyielding, trembled in silence. Protocols, the unbending rules of procedure, suddenly felt secondary, almost absurd in the face of raw human skill. Days before this incident, Marcus had endured countless small humiliations that had shaped his patience. A nurse had rolled her eyes as he offered to guide a patient to the restroom. A security guard had ignored his warnings about a fall hazard. A doctor had muttered about interfering janitors when he reminded them of a patient's allergy. These moments, seemingly minor, had built a silent river of indignation in his mind, and yet Marcus never retaliated. His resistance was quiet, almost imperceptible, but profound. He had learned that real power did not shout. It waited, it observed, it acted at the precise moment when courage and honor could shine. He had lived through ambushes, through the impossibility of saving everyone, through mistakes that haunted him like ghosts. The hospital, with its petty hierarchies and blind protocol, was just another battlefield. Now in the collapsed soldier, that moment had arrived. The world had demanded recognition, and Marcus delivered it without a word, without a plea. The action itself spoke volumes. The nurse who had initially doubted him could not look away. The resident who had scoffed at his presence felt shame press heavy in his chest. Even the doctor, usually authoritative and unflappable, now stood rigid, unable to mask the awe creeping into his features. Their disbelief mirrored the audience's own. How could someone so invisible, so underestimated, wield life-saving skill with such calm certainty? Around them, the hospital itself seemed to pause. The constant beeping, the footsteps, the routine shuffle of daily tasks, all fell into a hush, a momentary respect for the silent power moving through the room. Marcus's calm became a lens through which they viewed themselves, anxious, hurried, uncertain, and yet entirely unprepared for the reality of courage and skill unrecognized. As the soldier stabilized, Marcus's hands lingered for a moment, checking each vital sign with precision. He noticed a small tattoo peeking from the sleeve, a symbol of a military unit he had once served with, a hint of shared history in a world that had forgotten its veterans. For a fleeting instant, he allowed himself a thought that recognition, if it came, would not be requested. It would be earned, as always, through quiet competence. From the corner of the room, a hospital administrator observed silently. He had arrived minutes too late, drawn by alarms and whispers. He had watched Marcus, seen the janitor save the soldier, and felt a prickling of something he hadn't expected: humility. The system he oversaw was rigid, unyielding, and yet it had been appended by one man's quiet skill. The administrator did not move, did not speak. But the stage was set. Change, subtle and unstoppable, was rippling through the hospital. Marcus finally straightened, the soldier breathing evenly beneath his hands. His eyes swept the room, not in triumph but in quiet insistence. A few words, unspoken, resonated in the minds of those present. Respect is not given, it is recognized in the moment courage proves itself. And later, when the soldier was wheeled away to intensive care, one nurse whispered, almost to herself, "Some heroes do not wear medals. Some heroes wear silence." These phrases would echo, unbidden, in the minds of those who witnessed the event, becoming invisible threads of moral awakening. Marcus returned to his mop, the tools of his civilian invisibility once again in his hands. But the world had already shifted. Those who dismissed him now carried a seed of doubt. The rigid rules of the hospital hierarchy had been quietly challenged by a single, decisive act of heroism. Outside, the soldier's family would arrive, unaware that a janitor had saved their loved one. Inside, the staff would speak in hushed tones, acknowledging the invisible hand that had guided life back into a fading body. And Marcus, ever silent, had reminded everyone that dignity, skill, and honor often go unnoticed until the precise moment the world cannot afford to ignore them. The next moments would reveal the full extent of his hidden power. Not just as a man who saves lives, but as a figure who commands respect through quiet strength. The soldier's chest rose and fell with steady rhythm. Yet the hospital had not fully exhaled. The ER, once a storm of panic and inefficiency, now hummed with a tension neither staff nor patients could name. Every eye lingered on Marcus Hayes, not with curiosity, but with an unspoken question: who is he, really? He did not meet their gaze. Marcus returned to his mop with deliberate slowness, as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. The floors were sticky. The scent of antiseptic sharp in his nostrils, the fluorescent lights above him humming their indifferent rhythm. Yet beneath the surface of his calm, a quiet storm brewed. Outside the immediate chaos, unseen yet profound, forces began to shift. Word of the incident traveled swiftly, carried first in whispers from nurse to nurse, then through administrative channels. One physician, a seasoned veteran of countless ER crises, could no longer ignore the reality a janitor had performed life-saving actions with the precision and authority of a field surgeon. Authority, when challenged by truth, falters. Protocol, when confronted by necessity, bends. And the world Marcus had long since abandoned, the world of discipline, of soldiers, of life and death decided in seconds, stirred quietly. Marcus had spent years in Afghanistan as a combat surgeon, leading teams, orchestrating field hospitals, saving lives under conditions most could not imagine. Alongside him, trusted comrades, brothers in arms, had carried similar burdens. They were dispersed now, across cities, units, even countries, but bonds forged in shared trauma remained unbroken. One such ally, Colonel Benjamin Kane, received the message in the early evening. A former battlefield surgeon, now working as a janitor, had stabilized a collapsing soldier in a civilian hospital. Kane's mind, trained to act swiftly, did not hesitate. He activated his network discreetly, contacting retired medics, military liaisons, and local authorities who could verify credentials. Soon, the evidence of Marcus's extraordinary skill, once invisible, was documented, corroborated, undeniable. The hospital administration, once secure in its rigid hierarchy, faced a subtle but unstoppable pressure. Their own rules, which demanded deference to rank and position, collided with a fact both irrefutable and inconvenient. Marcus Hayes was no ordinary janitor. He was a veteran surgeon, decorated for bravery under fire, whose life-saving expertise had just been demonstrated in the harshest of proofs. A soldier's heart stopped and was restored. Within the hospital, whispers grew louder. Staff who had doubted him began to watch closely as Marcus moved through the halls with quiet composure. Patients who had barely noticed him days before now paused, studying his face, sensing something extraordinary beneath the humble exterior. Even the administrators could not ignore the shift, their authority questioned not by argument, but by the undeniable demonstration of competence and courage. A nurse who had previously scoffed approached hesitantly. I just wanted to say thank you," she murmured, her voice catching. Marcus nodded briefly, offering nothing more than a faint, respectful smile. Recognition, he had learned, was not something to be demanded. It was something to be earned in the moment that truly counted. Outside, social media began to ripple. Someone had captured a fragment of the event, a janitor calmly performing CPR, saving a soldier's life while the world around him panicked. The clip went viral overnight. The phrase, "silent hero," trended within hours. The public, hungry for stories of quiet courage, finally saw what the hospital had ignored. That evening, the soldier's family arrived. The young man, still weak but breathing steadily, was wheeled into the waiting room. His mother, pale and trembling, grasped his hand, tears streaming as she whispered prayers. His father, stoic yet shaken, studied Marcus with something between disbelief and gratitude. Marcus approached quietly, standing at a distance, allowing the family to process the miracle without intrusion. The mother's gaze met his briefly, and in that silent moment, understanding passed between them. A life had been restored, and this quiet man had delivered it. It was then that the hospital administrator, face pale and humbled, stepped forward. "Marcus Hayes, we owe you more than words can express," he said, voice unsteady. "You've demonstrated courage and skill beyond anything I could have imagined. We failed to see who you truly are." Marcus inclined his head slightly, silent as ever. No celebration, no claim to fame. His victory was in the life saved, the acknowledgement silently earned, and the restoration of dignity where it had been denied. Two nurses who had been closest to the chaos repeated phrases that would linger for weeks. True strength does not ask for recognition, it commands it in the moment it is needed. Not all heroes wear medals, some wear silence and dignity, and the world only notices when it has no choice. Even the soldier, weak but lucid, murmured, "I don't know his rank or his past. All I know is he saved my life. That's all that matters." These words, simple yet profound, spread throughout the hospital, reaching staff, patients, and eventually the public. Marcus's quiet heroism became a touchstone for discussions about dignity, respect, and the unseen battles fought daily by ordinary people carrying extraordinary skill. Over the next days, the hospital began to change. Small gestures, invisible but significant, acknowledged Marcus's contribution. A formal commendation was prepared, not as a gift, but as recognition of truth. Staff who had doubted him approached with newfound respect. Procedures were adjusted, policies revisited, all inspired by the quiet lesson Marcus had delivered. Competence, courage, and dignity can upend rigid hierarchies without confrontation, simply by being undeniable. Outside crowds did not gather, but those who heard the story stopped, paused, reflected. Marcus's quiet defiance of invisibility, his unwavering skill, and his refusal to demand attention created a ripple far wider than he could have imagined. Recognition, it seemed, was not about shouting. It was about acting with integrity when the stakes were life itself. Even as Marcus returned to his night shift, pushing a mop across the floors of the ER, the world had shifted. The soldier recovered steadily, unaware of the man's full history, yet surrounded by gratitude he could barely articulate. The hospital's rigid systems now included a new understanding: the invisible, underestimated, or overlooked might possess the greatest strength. In his mind, Marcus carried the memory of friends lost, of missions accomplished and failed, and the silent burden of lives entrusted to him. Each floor he cleaned, each patient he passed, was now a quiet affirmation of honor, not his own, but of all those who served without recognition. He paused briefly by the entrance, looking out at the night sky. The city hummed below, indifferent, unaware, yet he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had acted without expectation, had saved life without acclaim, and had reminded the world of what true courage looks like. The hospital was quieter now, though not truly silent. The hum of fluorescent lights above, the soft shuffle of feet along linoleum, the distant murmur of distant wards, everything continued, indifferent to human triumph. Yet for those who had witnessed Marcus Hayes in action, the world had shifted irrevocably. He pushed his mop slowly along the corridor, methodical, unhurried. Every sweep, every movement, was precise, almost meditative. There was no pride in his motion, only duty. The soldier he had saved was stable, now resting in intensive care, surrounded by family who could only guess at the hero who had delivered their son back to life. Yet for Marcus, it was never about acknowledgement. It had never been about recognition. He paused outside room 12, watching the sun's first pale light creep through the blinds, scattering across the floor in golden lines. In that quiet moment, Marcus allowed himself a thought he seldom entertained: hope. Hope that the small, silent acts of courage he performed, hidden beneath Janitor's blue, could ripple outward, touching lives in ways impossible to measure. Over the coming days, stories began to circulate, not just within St. Michael's Hospital, but across the city. A janitor had saved a soldier's life. Not a doctor, not a surgeon in a formal role, but a man overlooked, underestimated, who carried within him a lifetime of discipline, sacrifice, and quiet courage. Staff began to reflect on their own assumptions. How many others had they ignored simply because appearances deceived them? How often had rules or hierarchy blinded them to skill, integrity, and bravery? Marcus had taught them a lesson they could not unlearn: the value of a life saved, the power of calm authority, the dignity inherent in action without expectation. For the young soldier, the man in blue would become a silent figure in his memory. He would never know the full story, the battles Marcus had endured, the scars hidden beneath the surface. But he would know that life, fragile and fleeting, had been returned to him by a hand that refused to tremble when it mattered most. One evening, Marcus walked through the courtyard, mop in hand. As the hospital emptied into the cool night, he stopped briefly by the flagpole, where the American flag flapped softly in the breeze. Memories of Afghanistan washed over him: the dust, the heat, the smell of gunpowder, the weight of responsibility in life or death moments. Yet here, in this quiet civilian hospital, he had found a battlefield that required the same discipline, the same courage, the same moral clarity. From a distance, a few staff members watched him. Not with judgment, not with awe-seeking reward, but with silent acknowledgement. The man they had dismissed, the janitor they had ignored, had shown them what true strength looked like. A nurse whispered to a colleague, "Not all heroes wear medals." The phrase lingered, spreading quietly through the hospital like a gentle, unshakable truth. Marcus's story, captured in fragments, left a lasting impression. The words echoed in quiet hallways, whispered between staff, carried in social media posts, and lingered in the hearts of those who had been present. Courage does not announce itself. It acts. Silently, decisively, without expectation. The world often sees only what it chooses to see. True heroes live in the moments the world ignores until it cannot. Respect is earned in the heartbeat between life and death, not in applause or titles. These phrases would ripple beyond the hospital, inspiring others to reconsider assumptions, to honor quiet service, and to recognize the unseen battles waged daily by ordinary people performing extraordinary acts. Marcus returned to his duties, the mop gliding over the linoleum floor, the antiseptic smell lingering in the air. He did not linger in thought, did not seek recognition. But deep inside, he allowed a small, quiet satisfaction. He had acted with integrity, skill, and courage when it mattered most. He had saved a life, restored hope, and reminded a world too quick to judge that appearances deceive, and true heroism is often silent. Life continued around him, chaotic, mundane, and relentless. But the world was subtly, irrevocably changed. Those who had witnessed his act could no longer underestimate the quiet, disciplined, unassuming strength of a man who chose action over words, duty over recognition, and humanity over protocol. Even the soldier, now recovering steadily, would carry the memory of that night forever. Perhaps he would never fully know the weight of Marcus's past, the battlefield scars, the nights spent stitching life together amidst the roar of gunfire and screams of the wounded. But he would know this: life had returned to him in the hands of someone who refused to falter, even when ignored. And now, dear viewer, the story rests with you. Think for a moment. Where are you watching this story today? In a quiet room, a bustling cafe, or perhaps scrolling through on a phone during a fleeting pause in your day? Comment below and share your thoughts. Reflect on the heroes you may have overlooked, the acts of courage unseen in your own life. Honor them in small ways, with respect, recognition, or simply a quiet thought of gratitude. If Marcus's story moved you, if it reminded you of the silent strength present in ordinary people around you, please subscribe for more stories that celebrate courage, dignity, and unseen heroism. Share this story with someone who needs to witness quiet valor. Let the world remember true heroes often act in silence, and the moment they are needed is the moment that defines them. Because in the end, it is not recognition that makes a hero, it is the courage to act when it truly matters. Marcus walks down the hallway one last time. The night air outside beckons through the open doors. The hospital sleeps, unaware of the ripple of morality, courage, and silent heroism left behind. Marcus Hayes, janitor, former combat surgeon, silent guardian, disappears into the shadows of everyday life. Yet his legacy lingers, a quiet but unshakable testament. Honor does not demand recognition, it is revealed in action. The lights above flicker one final time, settling into a steady glow. The world continues, but some things, like true heroism, remain timeless.